For me, the stories on MythBusters that still move me are the ones in which I learned a deep new way of telling stories.
Welcome to The Well. I'm Brandon Edgens. Anson will be joining us in just a moment. The internet has enabled us to learn how to do just about anything. It's a DIY culture now, and Adam Savage has been front and center of it, where art and science and DIY all intersect. Known primarily for MythBusters and now several of his own shows where he generously shares his considerable know-how with an eager public. He's made the act of creation an almost spectator sport. And it all started with something I like to call busy hand syndrome.
It's funny that you put it that way. I mean, so my father was a painter, and my mom was my mom is a psychologist, and I grew up in a household where that the practice of doing something that was important to you was exemplified every day. So my dad painted all the time, several hours a day, every day of my childhood. And he sculpted his life as a freelance animator and filmmaker and director so that he could do the work that paid the mortgage for as little as possible. Like 3 months, one job, that'll pay for our year. Excellent, I'm going to paint for the other 9 months. And he didn't even show a lot when I was a kid. So it was clear to me that the point of this wasn't commerce. The point of this was that he had to do this. So I grew up with that example. And that I think is, for all the complication of my dad, which is massive and significant, that was a really positive example of an austere approach to, I have to do this thing. I'm not even sure why. He didn't talk about it a lot, but that was real. And then, I screwed around thinking that being clever was enough, and I wasted a lot of people's time for a while. And I was a clever student, and I was able to get B's without doing any work, so I thought that life would be pretty easy. And you hit adulthood with that frame, and it's going to kick your ass. And somewhere in my mid-20s, I learned how to work hard. And that's the feeling that I love.
For me, and this may sound a touch hyperbolic, but I really mean it, Adam embodies the modifying spark of our species. Hardworking, incredibly curious, and obsessed with creatively solving problems. Blurring the line between scientist and artist, that is, imposing one's creative idea upon the material as a way of investigating the nature of that material. In other words, the best way to find out how something works is to mess with it. When I think of our species' busy hands, I think of an episode of The Ascent of Man, a 1973 BBC production hosted by Joseph Bronowski. There's a scene in episode 3. The host is kneeling on a riverbank, digging his hands into the mud bank and pulling out a big handful of wet clay.
It seems the most natural thing in the world to take some clay and mold it into a ball, a little clay figure, a cup. At first we feel that the shape of nature has been given us by this, but of course it's not. This is the man-made shape. What the pot does is to reflect the cupped hand. And nothing has been discovered about nature herself when man imposes these warm, rounded, feminine, artistic shapes on her. The only thing that you reflect is the shape of your own hand. There is a great intellectual step forward when man splits a piece of wood or a piece of stone and lays bare in that the print that nature had put before he split it.
It's important to me to, when I talk on that level, to widen the frame, because I don't restrict this simply to the physical act of making things. And I think of making as anytime we take our point of view and make something from nothing. So clay rolling around your hand is one way, but so is a poem or a dress or a film or a table. That when we reach out and we use our point of view to make something from nothing, we experience this incredible power of being part of our culture. That thing we made is culture, and it's the extra conversation we're having with each other about what the hell's going on. And there's so much power to be gained from that participation, because you feel like you understand that you're part of this river of experience, and you're not just receiving it, you're contributing to it.
Adam takes his contributions seriously because he's also a public educator, and he has to stand behind what he says.
Years ago, somebody came to me with a science show, and they said, we'd really like you to host this show. It's going to be really easy. Just a bunch of VO work and some ins and outs of the camera, and the money's really good. Here's the sample of what the first script is like. And it was like these little sound bites about science. And this one was trucks that jackknife. They jackknife because they've gotten past 22 degrees. And I read that, and I was like, that sentence doesn't say any actual information. So I was, okay, let me just look up jackknife tractor trailers. And I looked them up, and I kind of understand the physics. And okay. So if a tractor trailer is braking and the line between the cab and the truck, the load exceeds 22 degrees, then that driver cannot recover from that. And there's a deeper extra bit of physics that escapes me right now. But then I understood why tractor trailers jackknife, and so I rewrote that soundbite and I sent it back to the producer and said, this is the more correct way of saying it. And they wrote back and said, oh, no, all of this is locked, and we have no interest in your input whatsoever. They didn't say it like that, but it's all locked, and there's no changing this. We'd just like you to say it. And I was like, well, have a good time, you guys. Enjoy that. So I only want to do it if I'm going to learn from watching the show I'm recording.
Yeah, because it's not you.
No.
There's an integrity behind what you say, because people know that you do it, that you work through the details.
I was having dinner with someone last night, and they were asking, how is it possible that you and Jamie aren't friends, and yet you talk so glowingly about him? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, we just don't want to hang out together. But we were business partners, and really, we were very successful business partners for 14 years. And that's not easy. It's not easy to be business partners with someone. It's a marriage of its own kind, and there's a lot of difficulty in that marriage, as there is in any. And the fact is, as you say, a lot of people approached us to, quote, bust myths about their product. And in cable, you don't get residuals, so you get paid to do your work, and that's it. And, all we realized early on, all we end up with at the end of MythBusters is our integrity and whatever we've saved along the way. And so we turned down shit tons of those jobs. We took a few for companies that we believed in and that we felt honest and good about, but we turned down a ton, and we never argued about turning them down. And I will always love that partnership.
Have you ever taken one of those jobs and found yourself finding something that actually compromised the product?
No, thank God. Oh, God. I mean,
because that would be great.
There is a fun, so in reality television, there is this funny thing of our show wasn't about making fools out of people. Right. It was very specifically not about that. So this is why we never did dowsing. Because if you want to bust, you know what dowsing is? Dowsing is, it's going to sound crazy to you. Dowsing is the practice of taking a forked stick and using it to find water underground. Okay, yes, cool. Yes. So dowsing is easily provable to not be a thing. If there are people out there who want to tell me that their grandfather was a great dowser, I don't necessarily doubt your granddad's skills. I will just say that we can take cues from our landscapes, more than perhaps the forked stick in your hands, and that there are plenty of hidden ways in which humans might be attuned to water underground that don't have to do with that forked stick in your hand, topographical details, etc. The fact is that dowsing's been disproven in every scientific test that you could ask for it. But the problem is you need an operator. And you can't just train someone new to do it, because if I'm the audience and I'm watching that, I'm like, well, if he didn't know how to dowse, all you've shown me is that he doesn't know how to dowse. So you got to take someone that's convinced they know how to dowse, and then you got to put them in a situation where you make a fool out of them.
Right.
And that's not the kind of television I want to watch.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I believe in the science. I just don't want to sit there and make someone the jackass for my show. So there were times when we hired experts who showed up and couldn't do necessarily what they had represented they were an expert at. And then we had to just make them look great. Don't get me wrong, it's not that we cheated on the science, we just sometimes augmented the character, because again, the show wasn't to someone showed up, and if like we covered it the way we, it wouldn't have looked as it wasn't the story we were there to tell.
You give this disclaimer at the top of your episodes for very obvious reasons. Have there been people to try and replicate your experiments?
Luckily, no.
No, okay.
There's been a couple of people. So Cary Grant and Tori did a story about if a train's going by, can the air that it moves pull you into the train? And the answer is no. They proved that experimentally. And there's been 2 news stories about people who pulled people back from a train that was coming in, saying they learned it on MythBusters. So they concluded the opposite of what our conclusion. They remembered the opposite of what our conclusion was, and then the news story in the local paper was like, they saved some guy's life because of MythBusters, but for the opposite of the right reason. But we worked really hard, not just to say that disclaimer, but also every fire truck and police car was in the shot. And the safety equipment that we would wear was always over the top. I know for spray painting and stuff, people will yell at me and say, you didn't wear dust masks. But for the big stuff, we were always wearing the fire suits and the bomb suits and the protective gloves. And we went to all that effort to put in your head, this is going to take a lot of effort. Mm-hmm. We want that. That's part of the story we were telling. That to do this safely requires a whole bunch of nonsense. I mean, there's so many times we called this the MythBusters moment, where you're standing there just before the experiment and you're like, I'm in a greased up latex fetish suit at the top of a 250-foot slide above a quarry lake whose pH is off, which means nothing lives in that lake, which is why we use it for blowing shit up. Who is paying for this? How is it possible we get to do this? At the, and then so I loved all the coverage of Jake Gyllenhaal in the new Spider-Man Far From Home film about him going, oh no, you got to make me a suit. I'm going to get into a superhero suit, and I want it to have lights, and I want to dress up. And it's like, yeah, you came to play. You came for this experience, and I would totally be one of those guys going, yeah, no, I'll wear the mocap dots, but I want a suit.
In case you couldn't tell, Adam is an all-in kind of guy. And when you put your entire self into anything, the dividends can be unexpected. Take this example from when a simple act of myth-busting, which is a highly creative endeavor in and of itself, ended up teaching Adam something fundamental about his own nature.
Was there any completion of a project, whether it was a MythBusters episode or anything else, that comes off to you as being the most satisfying result or the most satisfying end to a journey?
For me, the stories on MythBusters that still move me because of my sense memory of the experience of doing that are the ones in which I learned a deep new way of telling stories. Really? Yeah. Each of the plateaus in the creative process of making MythBusters for me were informed by, oh, we can tell this kind of story. So in the very beginning of the first season of MythBusters, one of the very first things we did was will a penny thrown from the Empire State Building kill you when it hits the ground? Can it build up enough velocity to become a deadly projectile? And in this, I'll try and make this a reasonably short story. A penny doesn't have a single terminal velocity. It has two. It has one on its face and one on its edge, and it actually tumbles between them, which is unique because most objects have a stable falling position. And they will fall in the position that presents the highest amount of resistance to the air. It's just, I don't exactly know the physics of why that is, but that's the case. But a penny tumbles between. And we had math from this wonderful NASA scientist who'd done this math about these terminal velocities and how he'd worked them out. And then he had experimentally tested them in a giant vacuum tank NASA had. And I'd done a piece to camera about this, but I was flying back from New York, from filming at the Empire State Building, and I was thinking, and again, this is like 3 months into filming MythBusters. It's the first time I've ever done a TV show. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. But I'm thinking about this piece to camera, and I'm thinking, I have a point of view about this. And the point of view is that I don't like that I did a piece to camera about math. I am not going to learn from that. Like, I understand what that means, but that's because I've been thinking about it for weeks now. I want the audience to understand it at this physical level, not at the intellectual level, because I learn physically, not intellectually. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I just need a wind tunnel that has two speeds, like a high speed at the bottom and like a vertical wind tunnel with a high speed at the bottom and a lower speed at the top. And okay, so I went looking for one, and no one's ever made one. That's not something that was needed to be done, and no one did it. So I did it. And when I did it, and when I figured out how to get it right, and I put the penny in, and my theory was if I got the wind tunnel correctly built, the penny would tumble up and down in the wind tunnel. And then that happened. To see my hypothesis rendered true by my experiment, I was like, holy shit, I have something to contribute to this job. And I realized that I was thinking when I started looking for that wind tunnel, well, there just must be a science demonstration experiment because there must be one of all these things, because I've seen all these things on Bill Nye and Mr. Wizard. And no, there isn't. And it's like, we're just going to have to come up with this on our own. And so that's a key moment for me, of like one of my favorite moments in the show, of that happening. I still have that wind tunnel.
because it was, you made it yours.
I made it yours, and I had something. It turned out my point of view was useful. There's nothing better than finding out your point of view is useful.
MythBusters' popularity highlights something curious about our species. We love to watch displays of competency. Alfred Hitchcock knew this, saying, people love watching someone good at their job. Think James Bond. This is why we love professional athletes. We want to see what a human being can do. It's an exhibition. And Adam has taken the act of building and turned it into a spectator event. People want to watch him test his own competency.
We crowdsourced a replica of the command module hatch from Apollo 11. So the Smithsonian did an amazing 3D scan of the command module, and you can actually go to their website and look around it in 3D. It's totally amazing. They found and discovered all sorts of new things about the command module hatch that no one, graffiti from the astronauts that no one had seen because it was behind a panel. And they had a scan of the hatch, but it hadn't been released. So they released it to us, to our team, and with some help from Autodesk and this amazing digital artist, Andrew Barth, we turned it into a full mechanical 3D drawing of the entire hatch. We then, my director of special projects, Jen Schachter, then separated into 45 pieces, each one sent to a different makerspace around the world. And Microsoft's Advanced Prototype Division built the base door and the stand, and all the parts arrived in DC, and then we built the thing in a day in front of an audience, live in the room at the Smithsonian. During the day, about 2,600 people cycled through the room. And so it's literally like I'm standing where the television is right there, and the closest crowd member is right where you are. And so every decision I'm making is being watched and talked about and silently judged by, 400 people in this room. I had this big piece, and it was out by, 25 thousandths, right? Just it's not fitting in this hole by 25 thousandths. And I'm like, all right. I can't sand this. I guess I could grind this thing down, but the base is made of wood. Okay, let me pull out my Leatherman. I think this blade is good for pulling 25 thousandths out of the radius out of the diameter of this thing. And so I pull this, I kind of just like, I do this big scrape around the perimeter. Like, that didn't feel like 25. That felt more like 15. I'm not even going to try to put the thing in. Okay, I'm going to do another scrape. I look at it, I look at the thing. Now I'm going to do one more scrape. I want this to work for the first time I do it. And then I pop the thing in, and I hear a round of applause from 400 people.
I want you guys to come over and watch us build all the time. That was lovely. Come right. Welcome to Oddly Satisfying.
The institutional knowledge I got from MythBusters was I can pretty much put together a build that I can probably finish by the end of the day. I'm not positive, but I'm really pretty sure. And that's enough to get it across the line, but also to still be a little bit of a dangerous place. And the audience gets to see me in that place, which is a level of audience interaction that's very different than being on stage or being in a club or being at Largo or something like that. Like, I've had the experience of doing performance in a lot of different frames, and live building in front of an audience feels like an entirely new one, and it's really exciting.
Watching Adam build stuff is fun, but I'd say his brand has become, somewhat accidentally, watching Adam do dangerous things. He swears it's not intentional, but these situations do tend to find him, like the time he was in New Zealand visiting the Weta workshop, which led to an opportunity no one could have foreseen.
I was just down in April for a show I just did for Discovery called Savage Builds, and Peter Jackson owns all of these. He has maybe the world's largest collection of World War I airplanes.
Yeah, I'd heard that, yeah.
And some of them are originals. Many of them are built by him, by his airplane factory.
What?
He has...
I knew about the collection. I didn't know he was making them.
He was making them. He is making them.
Usually when people hit midlife, you hear about a boat or a new car.
You got an Audi.
I got an airplane factory.
Manufacturing old airplanes.
He is, and the best part is that the various FAAs were like, you can't make those. This is all this very specific. You can fly a plane if you build it. Right? This is kind of this lovely ethos of the FAA and other licensing bodies. If you build it, you can fly it, but you have to. There's a percentage, and I think it's like 61%. So he can't like make a factory that builds these old planes because there's no certification system for them. But if you have one of these old planes and it's been flying the whole time, you can keep flying it. It grandfathers in. So the point that they made was, if we build it to the exact blueprints and plans, and every nut and bolt and every spar, everything is exactly made to spec, then it's effectively a grandfather, and it's not a replica. It's literally the thing. It's the same thing. Yeah, and so I was talking to one of their engineers, and I said, "So you build everything to spec or above?" And he's like, "No. We actually learned that we build it just to spec, because we think of these things as primitive machines, but they were built by the greatest engineering minds in the world in 1910 and through the teens." The amount of iteration that they underwent, that the British had 250 planes at the beginning of World War I, and 4 years later they had 25,000 planes.
I'll never understand that.
And this is this constant process of iteration and refinement, and so these were magnificently tuned machines. So if you replace some piece of it, some spar, with something carbon fiber or something super modern, it ends up putting strain on a system because it won't wear out at the same schedule as the other things. And it's all been built to do that, to maintain and hold itself aloft. And you don't mess with that formula. And so the only thing they change is they use, instead of regular white glue or rabbit skin glue, whatever they used in 1910, they use epoxy to glue the wood together. And that's the only change they make.
Wow.
Everything else is done as per original. So, sorry, I went down because Peter is such a generous man and loves to give people unparalleled experiences. Clearly with his movies, that's his goal. I was in New Zealand at one point, and he was like, well, you got to come up to the aerodrome and we'll take you flying. And I got to go flying in these planes, and it was mind-blowing. And I came back down and I said, someday we should think about putting laser tag on these, and then we could enjoy a dogfight. So for this Discovery show, it was the last episode we filmed for Savage Builds. We made 8 episodes. I had to beg Discovery for some more dough to get to New Zealand to go do this, but I was like, it's Peter Jackson, and they did. They funded the episode, and we went down, and an amazing engineer I work with named Zach Ratting and Jeremy Williams put together this amazing infrared laser sensor array system. They made 30 sensors. We bolted 15 to each plane. We had lethal hits, non-lethal hits, pilot hits, engine, gas. We had smokers on the planes. We had red crepe paper in my helmet, so if a pilot got hit, you'd see blood fly out of my head. And
was Peter Jackson playing with you?
He wasn't flying. He was down on the ground and like super fascinated by what we're figuring out, because we're actually rediscovering the mechanics of dogfighting in these planes, because these are the genuine article. These pilots are incredibly experienced, Gary and Bevan, and those guys, the 2 pilots, had read tons of accounts of World War I aces and fighting, and they were coming down from these dogfights going, we understand more than we ever did before. They're like, they're understanding it from an angle that they hadn't experienced. And by the end,
did I say that this is the plane I'll be flying in?
I was in a British RE-8, so that was a pilot and a gunner, and we were against a German Fokker, a triplane.
That's Fokker DR-1 triplane, made legendary by German flying ace Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron.
My pilot, Gary, was so confident of my ability to hold on at that point by the last flight that we're pulling negative G's, in which like I'm holding on to the plane to stay in because there's one cable from me to the floor of this like wooden platform I'm standing on to fire these gas blowback guns with flashing lights at this German plane as it's flying by, and it's like super terrifying and awesome.
But it looks like I got one good shot off before I bought it.
I think we got him. You got him? Yeah, he's smoking.
It turns out I hit the Fokker's engine at the same time he took me out.
Mutually assured destruction. Yeah! I might be dead, but he's dead too.
I've always said, when people ask me about my career, I've always said I have the weirdest job in the world. And I think you've won up to me. I think that you definitely have a weirder job than I do.
I feel like I was just in a World War I aerial dogfight. Yeah! And even better, without the dying part.
One of the things I'm so grateful for getting to do was a couple of years before the end of Obama's tenure, Tom Khalil and his Office of Science and Technology Policy tapped me to help them spread the word about making around the country. And I got to visit makerspaces all over the country and tell stories about them on my website and help normalize that exploration, because every kid should have that. Every kid should be able to feel that power. And those of us that were encouraged by their parents and their environment to do that, to make stuff that didn't necessarily make sense and take crap apart with no plan and just see what happens, like those of us that got that grace, it's informed the rest of our lives. And for us to be good stewards of culture, we should be participating. We should be making the things that we can make, that we want to make, that are part of that conversation.
It must have been a really inspiring and optimistic experience to go and see what people are up to in their little islands of
So I visited this place over here on the East Coast called the Elizabeth Forward High School, and it's a Christian girls' school, and they thought, oh, we're going to get a makerspace, and they got a couple 3D printers, and they gave them to this teacher, and she didn't know how to make them work, and so with her students, she took her students across the street to this assisted living facility where each student adopted one of the residents, and over the course of 2 semesters, iterated and executed with the 3D printers a product for each resident that improved their lives.
Wow.
I mean, they came up with this on their own. This wasn't a grand plan. This was, what do we do with these? Well, okay, there's an opportunity. Let's take and the amount of mind-expanding experience in that curricula for those kids, for those students. I mean, it just blew my mind. And that's the kind of story I got to see over and over and over again. Blair in Detroit with a makerspace where homeless people are building their homes out of CNC routers, and Detroit is giving land so that a homeless person can come to this space, start with an 8 by 8 foot box with a kitchen and a bed and a chair and the minimum, but Detroit gives them the land to go put that box so that they can live in the house that they made. And it's just super amazing stuff going on. And, as William Gibson says, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
I heard that.
Is there one particular endeavor that stands out as the farthest you've ever gone to complete something?
Oh, wow. I mean, some of at least 2 or 3 of my projects have lasted over years. Well, actually, many of them. I mean, my alien spacesuit was like 14 years to finish it. Not constant at all. Just like serially, like once a year I'll dip in and finish this part. And oh no, I don't have that part and I don't have the reference for that part. So I'll find the guy that has the reference. And that took me months, and I'll keep on going. So I've got lots of projects that are still on the burner that I haven't done. It's impossible to pinpoint a single thing, because again, some of these things are years in the making, and since what I'm looking for out of these is a specific experience, I'm never really sure if I've gotten there until I've gotten there. And then once I've gotten it, there might be another experience around the corner. Like, I like to like when I have a prop replica, it's really important to me that the prop replica not just look like the thing in the movie. I want it to kind of be the thing that it's representing. So I own, in the beginning of Hellboy, when they first encounter the creature Samael in the museum tearing stuff up, Abe Sapien has a box, which is clearly like a research box, and he pulls a book out and says, oh, this is Samael, the beast of blah, blah, blah. And so this research box that he has is a prop that got sold after the film, and I bought it on eBay, of all places. And the 6 books that are in there are all blank. They were built by a bookbinder in England, and they have gold stamping foil on the spines. And it was missing 2 books when I bought it, and I managed to find the bookbinder and have them make me 2 more books. And I've been recently thinking, you know what, I got to start filling those books with stuff.
I knew where this is going.
So I bought a whole bunch of old magic texts, of reprints of old, like 14th, 15th, 16th century magic texts. And I was thinking, for me, the paraphernalia, the paper props are the hardest to do, because I don't like my handwriting. I can't do handwriting that feels to me like it's old. So I thought, I'm just going to get some calligraphic pens, and I'm going to try and teach myself how to write in a way so that I could, like, just a spell a day, let's say just 1 spell or 1 creature per day, and I'll do a little drawing, and I'll try and turn these books eventually into Gnostic texts that are just suitable to be in Abe Sapien's research box. Actually, when I first met Guillermo del Toro at Comic-Con in San Diego, I was like, I own Broom's box. And he goes, there are 2 of them. I have the other.
Of course he does.
Did Guillermo ever tell you about the time he saw a UFO?
No.
Yeah, this is great story. Doug Jones hadn't heard the story either, and I read this in an interview with Guillermo. Only met him once, very early in my career, when he was casting Hellboy. Lovely guy, but apparently it was just around the time that the UFO videos had hit the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah.
And the person that was interviewing him for The Shape of Water, I can't remember what publication it was for. Somehow this came up in conversation, and Guillermo said, "Oh, I've seen UFO." And she's, "Oh, really? Well, can you tell us about it?" And he says, "Yes, well, I was in my 20s, and my friend and I, we go and we get some beer, and we go up to the cliffs overlooking the ocean, and we sit on the hood of the car, and we pop open a beer, and as soon as this happens, this UFO comes down from this guy right in front of us." And she says, What went through your mind? And he goes, "Well, the first thing I thought is, this is terrible design." It just looks so typical UFO.
Oh my God. That's great.
Of course, that's what go through his
current political climate. There have been times when I have made the joke, I think the screenwriter writing reality is just a little too on the nose.
Yeah.
Back when we first recorded this episode, Adam was in town for Comic-Con, and he was attending in disguise as a character from the famous anime Spirited Away. But this wasn't the first time he had cosplayed as No-Face. We'll end this episode with Adam's story about the first time he cosplayed as the character No-Face. It's one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard about the power of collective storytelling and how the theater of the mind can connect us on levels inaccessible by any other means. Here's Adam.
I'm about to walk in New York's Comic-Con as No-Face, Koniashi from Spirited Away. And No-Face was the costume that taught me the depth of cosplay. So I love these films. I don't know if you know Spirited Away. Okay, so like my kids grew up on Hayao Miyazaki's film, and Spirited Away is one of my top 5 films, unqualified, like animated or whatever. It's just one of my favorite places to go. And I built this No-Face costume, and like I've said, I've spent 14 years making some costumes. No-Face's costume took me like 2.5 weeks and cost maybe $100. It was super inexpensive, and it's a big white face with a bunch of fabric and a framework I built onto a kayak helmet, and I wore it to San Diego Comic-Con. And I also had a pouch on the inside of the robes full of gold chocolate coins, so that when I took pictures with people, and I had already realized I didn't want to talk in the costume, so I wouldn't speak. So when anyone asked me a question, I would bow and I would meekly do what they were asking and take photos, and then I would say thank you, and then I would, with a little bit of a flourish, make a gold coin appear in my black gloved hand, and people were like losing their minds. They're just like, oh, whoa, totally having an amazing time. And then after about 10 minutes, someone grabs my hand. And I can't see out of this costume very well. I can see most people's feet. Grabs my hand and puts the coin back in my hand. And 10 minutes later, it happens again. And I'm trying to figure out why I'm getting these coins back, because it definitely feels like there's aggression in the return of the coin. And I don't know who I'm upsetting until I look and I see someone walking away from me kind of with this, like, they just don't want to be a part of this. And then I realized that in the film, it's bad luck to take No-Face's gold.
Oh.
And that I realize I'm participating in a theater where the line between the audience and the performer doesn't exist. And we're all just playing along. And this became the rhetorical flourish that I came up with 10 minutes before I went on stage that finished my TED Talk, which is that when we are cosplaying, we are going out there and we are injecting we are putting ourselves into narratives that meant something to us. We are wrapping those narratives around ourselves, and we are feeling what it feels like to be inside that for a while. And we are enjoying that with each other. And by putting on the costumes, we're revealing ourselves to each other. There's a really lovely grace from that. There's a well-known actor, I won't name him, but a well-known actor who is a true craftsman who does not give a crap for the notoriety that he has gotten over his life. He's just a craftsman. And he came up to me after that TED Talk and was like, I want to tell you, I've never been comfortable with fan culture, but you really helped me understand in a way I didn't before, and I want to thank you. Mm-hmm. Because that resonated with him. As a performer, as an actor, he understands what it is to join a narrative that's different and new and see what you can get out of it. Like, that spoke exactly to his craft, I think.
Even a brief conversation with Adam can touch on 100 different interesting subjects. This is the pleasure and privilege of possessing a curious mind, plus the opportunity to explore the objects of one's fascinations. Next time, in part 3, we persuade Adam to turn that curiosity of his on himself for a little bit. What does he see? Next time on The Well. The Well is produced, recorded, and edited by Anson Mount and Brandon Edgens. Theme music written and performed by Jonathan Myberg. Until next time, have a great time.